Welcome to Twist of Revenge, a place where we tell stories that don't just entertain but stay with you. Stories of family, loss, quiet devotion, and the surprising ways love shows itself. If that speaks to your heart, go ahead and subscribe, because sometimes one story is all it takes to change how you see the people around you. Today's story is titled, "My dad drove delivery trucks all night. I resented him until I discovered every trip was a step toward my dream." Let's begin with Chapter 1. The Man in the Blue Jacket. When you're a teenager, embarrassment comes easy. Sometimes it even becomes a way of life. And if you're like I was, 15, full of opinions and short on perspective, embarrassment can shape how you see the very people who love you the most. My father wore the same navy blue delivery jacket every morning. The sleeves were worn soft at the elbows, and the company patch, some faded cursive that read Arrow Freight Express, was fraying at the edges. He'd come home just as the sun started poking through our thin kitchen curtains, his boots still dusted in highway gravel, the scent of diesel and coffee clinging to his clothes. Every morning, he'd drop his keys in the chipped bowl by the door, pour himself half a mug of yesterday's coffee, and sit across from me at the kitchen table like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. To him, maybe it was, but to me, it felt like everything I didn't want. I remember once I asked him, "Why don't you just find a normal job?" He just smiled, that quiet kind of smile that says, "You'll understand one day." I hated that smile. To my classmates, he was the delivery guy. No suit, no tie, no college degree. Just a man in a battered truck hauling boxes and crates across state lines. And while they got picked up in SUVs by fathers in collared shirts who spoke in boardroom tones, mine was dozing off in the driveway until dinner. I stopped inviting friends over. I stopped asking him about his day. I stopped looking him in the eye. The thing about shame is it grows best in silence. And I let it grow. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that every mile he drove, every sleepless night he spent on unfamiliar roads wasn't for the paycheck. It wasn't even for the bills. It was for me. But that truth that would come much later. For now, all I saw was a man in a blue jacket, worn at the seams. An embarrassment I didn't yet have the heart to understand. He rarely spoke at breakfast. Sometimes he'd ask if I slept okay. Sometimes he'd mention how foggy it had been on Route 19 or how a raccoon had darted across the road near the Georgia line. But mostly he just sat across from me, sipping that bitter coffee, his eyes a little red, his hands stained with ink from freight slips. I kept my earbuds in, even when they weren't playing anything. I thought it gave me power, like I could keep the world at bay, especially him. I wanted to build a space between us, some invisible wall to make it clear that we were not the same, not even close. He let me. When I left for school each morning, his truck was still warm in the driveway. Big, boxy, dented on the rear fender. It looked out of place in our neighborhood, like something that belonged in a depot, not beside flower beds and basketball hoops. Neighbors would wave to him as they jogged past, and he always waved back, sometimes with a little nod like he didn't mind that they were pretending they didn't know what kind of work he did. I minded, a lot. At school, I kept things vague. "My dad works in logistics," I said once during a career day Q&A, and even then I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. One of the girls, Jenna, I think, tilted her head and asked, "Like tech logistics or like warehouse stuff?" I gave a shrug, pretended to check my phone. It was easier to pretend I didn't know. What they didn't see was how he came home with his knees aching and his fingers blistered. They didn't see the calluses that spread like stories across his palms, or the way he sometimes winced as he bent down to untie his boots. What I saw instead was someone I didn't want to become. He didn't have a college degree, didn't own a briefcase. He didn't talk about books or world news or the future in grand, confident terms. He talked about tire pressure and time windows and whether the way station near Knoxville was still backed up at 3 a.m. When he wasn't working, he was sleeping. When he wasn't sleeping, he was quiet. Sometimes I wondered what he was like before I was born, before the truck, before the weight of fatherhood started pressing on his shoulders like the crates he stacked in the back of that van. But I never asked, and he never told me. What I remember most are the shadows, those faint lines under his eyes that never went away, the creak of the front door at dawn, the way the living room always smelled faintly of engine oil and exhaustion. We lived in the same house, but I don't think I ever really saw him, not then. And if he noticed the growing distance between us, the eye rolls, the silences, the shrinking affection, he never said a word. He just kept driving. At school, reputation is currency. It doesn't matter who you are inside, it matters who people think you are. And when you're a teenager, you start spending that currency recklessly. I remember the first time someone laughed about my dad. It was lunchtime, sophomore year. A few of us were sitting on the concrete edge by the parking lot, watching cars file in for early pickup. Jenna, the same girl from career day, pointed toward a battered blue truck pulling out onto the road. "God, that thing looks like it belongs in a scrapyard," she said, wrinkling her nose. "Bet it smells like farts and sweat inside." A couple people laughed. I laughed too. What I didn't say was, "That's my father's truck." I didn't say anything at all. That night I came home to find that same blue truck in our driveway, hissing faintly as the engine cooled. My dad was sitting on the porch, boots off, rubbing one knee like it had been acting up again. I didn't say anything to him either, but something shifted. After that, I stopped mentioning him altogether. When teachers asked if my parents could attend conferences, I said my mom worked nights. When friends made jokes about delivery drivers or those Amazon zombies, I laughed like it didn't sting. I started saying things like I live with my mom or my dad's out of the picture. The truth wasn't convenient, so I buried it. At home, I became colder, sharper. Every time he asked how school was, I gave one-word answers. Every time he offered me a ride, I refused. I didn't want anyone to see me getting out of that truck, wearing clothes that smelled like packing tape and gasoline. I told myself I was just trying to survive, that he'd understand someday, but he already did. One Friday evening, I came home from a friend's house. He was in the garage, bent over a dusty plastic bin. When he heard me come in, he smiled that same tired smile and said, "Hey, kiddo, thought we could fix up the old bike this weekend. Yours is looking a little rough." I didn't respond. I just kept walking. He didn't call after me, didn't try again. The silence between us was no longer new. It was just routine. There's a kind of grief in watching someone you love become invisible to you. But I didn't feel grief. Not then. I felt relief. And that might be the cruelest part. There was one part of me I never spoke about. Not to friends, not to teachers, certainly not to my father. At night, when the house had gone quiet and the streetlights spilled pale orange shadows across my bedroom wall, I would sit on the floor, sketchbook balanced on my knees, and draw. Nothing fancy, nothing worthy of praise, just lines, charcoal and pencil, and smudges where my fingers had wandered too far. Hands, eyes, a staircase, my sneaker, once my dad's truck. I never called it art. That word felt too big for what I was doing, too bold, too sacred, but it was mine. I kept the sketchbooks hidden under my bed, stacked between a winter jacket and a shoebox of old report cards. I didn't want anyone to see them, especially him, because I didn't want to answer the question that always followed. Why don't you study this? And the only honest answer I could give was this: because we couldn't afford to dream. Art supplies were expensive, classes even more so. The school's art program had been gutted years ago, and what was left felt like a formality, a place to kill time before lunch, not cultivate anything real. Sometimes I'd walk past a poster in the hallway. Summer programs, portfolio reviews, scholarships. I'd pause, then keep walking, because even if I applied, who would drive me? Who would pay the fees? Who would understand why it mattered? Not the man who came home with aching knees and grease on his collar. Not the man who counted coupons and watched the gas gauge like a hawk. He was practical. He dealt in shipping labels and deadlines and tire rotations, not brushstrokes and light theory. He wouldn't get it, and maybe I was afraid that he would. That he'd recognize something in those drawings, that he'd ask why I hid them, that he'd see the part of me I didn't know how to name, so I drew in silence. I dreamed in silence, and every morning the sketchbook went back under the bed. The jacket, the shoebox, the weight of reality, all carefully placed on top. I'd tell myself, it's just a phase, it'll pass. But it didn't, and part of me hoped it never would. It happened on a Tuesday. There wasn't anything particularly special about that day. The sky was its usual gray. I had forgotten my lunch. I bombed a quiz I thought I'd aced. And by the time I got home, my patience had worn thin and my body felt too heavy for its own bones. He was waiting in the driveway when I arrived, leaning against the truck, his arms crossed like he'd been there a while. He straightened when he saw me, and for the first time in a long time, there was a kind of nervous energy behind his eyes. Hope, maybe, or worry. It was hard to tell. "Hey," he said. "Thought we could grab dinner together tonight, just the two of us." I froze halfway up the steps. "Why?" I asked. He blinked. "Just figured we haven't done that in a while. There's a diner off 52 that makes those sweet potato fries you used to like. I hadn't had those fries in years." "I've got homework," I said flatly. "You sure?" He tried again. "Just an hour or so, I'll have you back early." I looked at him then. Really looked. At the blue delivery jacket he always wore, threadbare at the elbows, zipper rusted halfway. At the way he stood, tired but hopeful, like a man still trying to make something right even when he wasn't sure what was broken. And I snapped. "God, Dad," I muttered, stepping past him. "You reek of gas and coffee and cheap food. Do you even hear yourself? A roadside diner and sweet potato fries. What are we, 12? I didn't wait for a response. I didn't want to see whatever was on his face. I heard his boots shift behind me, the sound of keys jangling, and then his voice soft, almost apologetic. "I just miss talking to you." I didn't turn around. "You want to talk?" I said, standing in the doorway now. "Try getting a real job, one that doesn't involve sleeping in the front seat of a van or smelling like diesel 24/7. Maybe then I'd have something to talk to you about." The silence after that was long. I didn't wait for him to break it. I slammed the door. Inside, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a wound. I dropped my bag, went to my room, and sat on the bed without moving for a long time. I could still feel the words I'd thrown at him, sharp and childish and cruel, but I didn't regret them. Not yet. Not then. Out on the driveway, I heard the truck door close, the engine turn over, and the rumble as he pulled away. He didn't say goodbye, and for some reason that made me angrier. He left that night around 9. Didn't say where he was headed, though I knew the pattern by now: small towns, back roads, warehouses that never closed. He always took the long hauls no one else wanted, the routes that started at midnight and ended at dawn. I watched from the hallway window as the truck pulled out, taillights fading into the black line of the street. A light mist hung over the road, softening the edges of everything, but his silhouette behind the wheel was unmistakable, hunched forward, steady, already tired before the journey had even begun. That was how he moved through the world, unnoticed, uncelebrated, necessary. I used to wonder why he didn't push for more. Why he stayed in that job year after year, loading pallets in the rain, braving icy overpasses, waiting alone in 24-hour truck stops that smelled like old coffee and burned bacon. He never complained, not once. The most I'd ever heard him say was, "Pays the bills." But it paid more than that. It paid in silences, in time missed, in birthdays cut short. It paid in creaking knees and strained backs and cups of instant soup eaten with the truck engine still running to keep warm. There's a kind of love that doesn't call itself love. That doesn't say the words or leave notes on the fridge or show up with flowers. It just keeps going, mile after mile, night after night, and that was the kind he gave. I didn't understand it, not then. I thought love was louder than that, more obvious, more dramatic. I thought if someone cared, they were supposed to say it, show it, prove it in a way you could post about or hold up like a trophy. But my father loved the way trees grow slowly, silently, toward the light. On the nights he drove, I could sometimes hear the front door close just before midnight, a shuffle of keys, the click of his boot heels on the tile, then nothing. He never said goodbye anymore, and I pretended not to notice. But the house always felt different when he was gone, like a part of the air itself had gone with him. Something still, something heavy. Once I found a receipt on the kitchen table. It was from a gas station 2 states away. Scrawled in the corner in his handwriting were 3 words: "No onion rings." A joke, maybe, or a reminder to himself. It made me laugh. Then it made me ache. Because even when I wasn't speaking to him, he still remembered what I didn't like. My mother didn't say much about the fight. She heard it. I knew she did. The walls in our house were thin, and words like "get a real job" tend to carry, but she never brought it up directly. That wasn't her way. Instead, the next morning she left a small bowl of cut fruit on the kitchen table next to my notebook, the way she used to when I was younger. No lecture, no guilt, just quiet presence. I didn't touch the fruit. At school, I couldn't focus. My body was in one room, but my thoughts kept drifting to a highway somewhere 2 states over, to a blue truck weaving between semis and silence, to a man with tired hands gripping a steering wheel no one ever praised him for holding. Why did he do it? That question kept nudging at me, unwelcome and unrelenting. Later that week, during a parent-teacher conference, Mr. Levin, my art teacher, pulled me aside. He was in his 60s, wore sweaters with elbow patches, and always smelled faintly of pencil shavings and coffee. He looked at me over the rims of his glasses with the kind of concern that made me uncomfortable. "Your father stopped by last month," he said gently. I blinked. "What?" During a delivery, he added, "Dropped off a box in the faculty lounge, saw your work on the wall and asked who drew it." I stared at him, unsure whether to feel angry or embarrassed or something in between. "He didn't say he was your dad, mister," Levin continued, but when I told him the name of the student, he smiled in this quiet way and said, "Yeah, I thought so." Then he left. I didn't know what to say, Mr. Levin didn't press, just patted my shoulder and said, "Not everyone shows up the same way, but sometimes showing up at all, that's everything." I nodded like I understood, but I didn't, not yet. On the walk home, I kicked gravel down the sidewalk, hands buried in my hoodie pockets, and tried not to feel anything. Not confusion, not guilt. Not the warm sting in my throat that came every time someone said something kind about him when I wasn't prepared for it. When I got home, the truck wasn't there, just the usual silence. The usual dinner waiting in foil on the stove. A note in his handwriting, no sorry, no love you, just 4 words, back Friday, drive safe. As if I was the one doing the driving, as if he was still watching over me from the rearview mirror of a life I never cared to see. It was late on a Thursday when I wandered into the garage. I wasn't looking for anything. Mostly, I just wanted to be somewhere the world couldn't reach me. The house was too quiet, and the silence had started to feel like it was looking back at me. So I grabbed a flashlight, opened the creaky side door, and stepped into the cold dim of the garage. The scent hit first, cardboard, dust, motor oil, and something faintly metallic. My dad's smell distilled into a single room. I swept the beam across the workbench, past a tangle of cords and old rags, past the rusting bicycle frame he kept saying he'd fix. The far corner was stacked high with boxes. They weren't new, taped hastily, corners bent, some marked with grease fingerprints or faded shipping labels. Curiosity pulled me closer. The top box had a sticker that read "Fragile Art Supplies." At first, I figured it was part of a delivery. Maybe he was holding them for someone else. But then I noticed another box underneath it, marked "Sketch Pad/Charcoal Keep Upright," and another beneath that, "Easel Foldable," then "Beginner Acrylics 36 PC." I crouched down, suddenly alert. These weren't random. They were familiar. The kinds of things I'd searched for online in secret. The brands I'd window shopped on my phone. The specific sketchbooks with thick paper I'd seen recommended on forums but never dared to ask for. Even the model of the folding stool I bookmarked 6 months ago and forgot about. My heart kicked against my ribs. I reached for one of the boxes, peeled back the tape just enough to peek inside. Beneath the crumpled packing paper was a sealed tin of graphite pencils, pristine and untouched. It didn't make sense. He never asked me about art, never talked about supplies, never said a word about anything beyond brake pads and invoices and weather conditions in Tennessee. I shoved the box closed, backed away, palms sweaty despite the cold. Had he seen my sketchbook? Was he watching? Or worse, was he planning to confront me with all of this, force me to do something I wasn't ready for? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. All I knew was this: the narrative I'd built around him, the indifferent delivery driver, the father too worn down to care, was starting to slip. And in the space between what I thought I knew and what might actually be true, I was beginning to feel afraid. Not of him, but of what I might owe him if he'd been quietly paying attention all along. The art showcase was supposed to be the highlight of the semester. Posters had gone up weeks in advance. A celebration of student expression, they called it. Every hallway bulletin board was plastered with watercolor silhouettes and bold serif fonts. For once, it felt like the school actually cared about creativity. Mr. Levin had encouraged me to submit something. I said no, of course, but he had a way of slipping past my defenses. He framed it like a technical challenge, not an emotional one. Just composition study, he'd said. No pressure. So I gave him a piece, a charcoal drawing I'd done late one night. It wasn't anything revolutionary, just a portrait, vague and half-finished, of a tired man in a truck cab. I hadn't meant it to be my father when I started, but by the time I finished, it couldn't have been anyone else. The night of the showcase, the school gym was buzzing. Parents, teachers, students, even the local paper had sent someone with a camera. I stood near the punch table, arms crossed, trying to pretend I wasn't waiting to see if anyone noticed my piece. And then I heard someone laugh, loud, sharp, mean. "Oh my God," a voice said. "That is your dad." I turned. Two guys from class were huddled by my drawing. One of them, Nick, I think, was pointing at the sketch like it was a meme. "Dude, look at the bags under his eyes. You could land a plane on those things." The other snorted. "He looks like he hasn't slept in a year. Is that a steering wheel? Is your dad like a bus driver or something?" "No," someone else chimed in. "He's a delivery guy, like long-haul stuff. You know, the ones who smell like gas and sadness." They all laughed, and I felt something cold press against my chest, sharp and merciless. Without thinking, I marched over, tore the drawing off the wall and shoved it into my backpack. I didn't care that people stared. I didn't care that Mr. Levin called after me. I didn't care about anything except getting out of that room. When I got home, the house was dark. My mother had left a note, "Working late, leftovers in the fridge." My dad's truck wasn't in the driveway. I went to my room, slammed the door, and sat on the floor, backpack still clutched to my chest like a shield. After a long while, I pulled out the drawing and stared at it. It didn't feel like a tribute anymore. It felt like a confession I didn't mean to write. And I hated him for making me feel that way, for being that man, for ruining even this. So when the front door opened after midnight, the creak of hinges, the shuffle of boots, the tired sigh, I waited until I heard his footsteps in the hallway, then opened my bedroom door just long enough to hiss. "I told you not to come to school. Why can't you just leave me alone?" He stood in the dark, eyes adjusting, lips slightly parted like he'd just reached for something and missed. "I didn't come inside," he said. "I just dropped off a package. I don't care." I cut him off. "Just to stop showing up in my life." He didn't say anything, not right away. Then quietly, "I was never trying to embarrass you." But I had already closed the door. And this time I didn't hear him walk away. The silence didn't last. 2 days later the phone rang. It was my mother's voice on the line, clipped and urgent. "Your father's in the hospital." The words didn't land at first. They floated in the air like static. I asked her to repeat herself. She did, slower this time, each syllable like a stone dropped into water. "Exhaustion," they said. "Severe dehydration." A back strain so bad he couldn't stand when the paramedics arrived. He'd been found slumped against the wheel of his truck in a rest stop 3 towns over, still clutching the shipping log he hadn't finished. I sat in the sterile hospital room, staring at him through the thin veil of Roman 4 tubes and heart monitor wires. His jacket was folded neatly on the chair, the same navy one I had memorized in irritation. Up close, I saw details I'd spent years refusing to notice. The cracks in his knuckles, the faint bruises on his forearms from lifting boxes, the gray that threaded through his hair more thickly than I remembered. He looked small. A nurse adjusted the drip, checked his chart, and whispered something about pushing too hard too often. My mother nodded, lips pressed tight. She had grown used to his stubbornness, but I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear that this time he had driven himself past a line he couldn't cross back from. When he stirred, I thought he might speak, thought he might scold me for sitting there, thought he might try to soften the moment with a joke about hospital food or the squeak of the Roman 4 stand. but his eyes barely opened and the words that did escape were thin, broken things. Still gotta finish the route. Then his eyelids fluttered shut again. I sat there, my throat thick, my hands clenched so tightly the skin went pale. I wanted to say something, I'm sorry, or stop working yourself like this, or even I don't hate you, not really. But the words jammed somewhere deep in my chest, so I just sat, listening to the steady beep of the monitor, watching the rise and fall of his chest. And for the first time, I felt the faint edge of a truth I hadn't dared to imagine. That the man I'd spent years resenting was slowly breaking his body, for reasons I still didn't understand. He was still asleep when I left the hospital. The doctors said he needed rest, that the body can only bend so far before it breaks. My mother stayed behind, perched in the stiff vinyl chair with a paperback she didn't read, her eyes flicking up at every sigh he made. I told her I'd go home to grab some things. The house felt different without him in it. Too still, too exposed, like the walls had lost part of their structure. I wandered through the rooms, restless, until I found myself standing again in the garage. The boxes were still there, stacked in the corner like sentinels, labeled in thick black marker, sketch pads, acrylics, easel, canvas boards. I remembered the night I'd first noticed them, how I'd convinced myself it was just coincidence, how I'd shoved the thought away before it could take root. But now I couldn't look at them and not see him. With trembling hands, I sliced through the tape on one box. Inside was a set of oil pastels, the exact brand I had once circled in an art catalog and then thrown away, too embarrassed to ask for. Another box held brushes in neat rows, wrapped in clear plastic like soldiers waiting for command. Underneath, I found sketchbooks, thick, high-quality paper, nothing like the cheap notebooks I'd been using. I sank onto the cold cement floor, surrounded by cardboard and packing paper, my breath shallow, my pulse loud in my ears. Each box was a mile, each brush a sleepless night. Every single item was a piece of road he had driven, a delivery he had made, a corner of himself he had given up so that one day I wouldn't have to. It wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. He had been collecting them, quietly, patiently, trip by trip, without ever saying a word. I pressed my hand against one of the sketchbooks, the cover smooth and cool under my fingers, and for the first time in years I cried. Not the angry kind of tears I was used to, but the kind that comes when you realize how blind you've been. The man I had called an embarrassment had been building my dream in silence, and I had never once said thank you. I didn't sleep that night. The boxes were still open on the garage floor, their contents spread like a confession he had never spoken. Every time I tried to close them, my hands shook. Every time I tried to push them back into the corner, it felt like I was burying him alive. So I sat among them instead, the brushes, the canvases, the pencils sharpened and waiting, and let the weight of it crush me. Morning came gray and unkind. I drove back to the hospital in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I walked into his room, he was awake, propped up against the thin pillows, pale but steady, his eyes flicking to the window as if the world outside might keep moving without him if he looked away too long. He turned when I entered, and for a moment there was only quiet recognition in his gaze. No judgment, no bitterness, just the tired warmth of a man relieved to see his child, and I broke. The tears came before I could stop them, hot, helpless, shameful. I sat down hard in the chair beside his bed, dropped my head into my hands and whispered, I found them. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't need to. Slowly, he reached for my hand, his fingers rough and bandaged, the skin calloused from years of steering wheels and cardboard edges. He held on gently, as if he knew I might try to pull away. "I didn't want you to find out like that," he said finally, his voice low, ragged. "Not yet." "Why?" I choked out. "Why would you? Why didn't you ever tell me?" He exhaled, long and thin, like he was emptying more than just air. "Because dreams are fragile," he said, "sometimes too fragile for the world. I didn't want mine to crush yours before you were ready." I stared at him, trembling. All the years of silence, of resentment, of careless words I had thrown at him, they hung in the air between us, unbearable and heavy. And for the first time I wished I could go back to every slammed door, every eye roll, every sentence I had laced with disdain. I wished I could gather them all, burn them, scatter the ashes on some highway he had driven and start over. But the past doesn't give refunds. It only leaves receipts. So I sat there, gripping his hand, my tears dripping onto the sterile white sheets, and whispered the only words I had left. "I'm sorry, Dad." He smiled faintly, eyes soft with exhaustion. "I know," he said. "I always knew." He closed his eyes for a moment, the faintest smile still resting on his lips, as though even the act of forgiving me had taken what little strength he had left. When he opened them again, they carried a different kind of light. Not the weary dullness I'd grown used to, but something quieter, older, like a lantern that still burns, even when the fuel is almost gone. "You know," he said, his voice roughened by sleep and years of road dust, "there was a time I thought I'd be an artist, too." The word startled me. I looked at him, the man in the delivery jacket, the man of cardboard boxes and diesel fumes, and tried to match him with the word artist. It felt impossible. And yet, as he spoke, the picture began to form. "I loved sketching," he went on. "Not big things, just moments. A cup left on a table, a shadow on the floor. Your grandmother used to say I had the eye for it, but life has a way of collecting tolls." He paused, glancing at the Roman IV line taped to his arm. "I got a job, then another, then you came along. I told myself I'd go back to it one day. I even kept a box of supplies for years, but boxes get pushed to the back of closets. And then one day you wake up and you're someone's father instead of someone's dreamer." His voice broke, but only slightly. "I didn't mind. You were worth it every mile, every night." I couldn't speak. My throat closed around the ache rising inside me. "So when I saw you," his eyes flicked to mine, "when I saw those little sketches you left on the counter, the ones you thought no one noticed, I recognized myself. The part of me I thought was gone, and I thought, maybe the dream isn't dead. Maybe it's just waiting for the right pair of hands." My hands. I felt them trembling in my lap, the fingers that had smudged charcoal in secret, now trembling under the weight of his words. "You don't owe me anything," he whispered. "Not gratitude, not forgiveness. All I want is for you to go further than I ever did, to draw the things I never had time to see." He reached for my hand again, the gesture small but steady. "Don't let the world talk you out of it the way it did to me." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The monitor beeped steadily. The hallway echoed with distant footsteps, and the morning sun edged through the blinds like a blessing neither of us expected. And in that sterile little room, surrounded by wires and antiseptic, my father did something I never thought possible. He gave me back my dream. A few days later, when they finally discharged him, he insisted on walking through the front door under his own strength. His steps were slow, each one pulled by gravity and fatigue, but there was a stubborn dignity in the way he straightened his back before crossing the threshold. I hovered close, ready to catch him if he stumbled. He noticed. "Don't," he said with a small grin. "I've been carrying weight longer than you've been alive. I can manage a front porch." The house was exactly as we had left it, quiet, a little too neat, as if it had been holding its breath for him. He paused in the hallway, looked around, then nodded toward the garage. "Bring me there," he said. I didn't argue. The garage smelled faintly of cardboard and motor oil, the same as always. But now, to me, it felt holy. The boxes I'd discovered were stacked neatly in the corner. Still half open from the night, I couldn't bring myself to seal them again. He eased himself onto an old folding chair, his breath shallow, his gaze steady. "Open them," he said. I knelt on the cement floor, pulling lids free, spreading brushes and paints and sketch pads across the ground between us. Under the bare bulb's glow, the colors came alive, crimson, cobalt, ochre, like they had been waiting years to breathe. He watched me, eyes tired but bright. "These were never meant for me," he said. "They were always meant for you." I looked up, words caught in my throat. "You think I drove those miles for the money?" His voice softened. "Money runs out, gas tanks empty, but dreams," he gestured weakly to the tools scattered across the floor. "Dreams can outlive us if we put them in the right hands." He reached for one of the sketchbooks, sliding it across to me. The motion was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. "This is yours now, all of it. Finish what I couldn't." I picked it up carefully, like it might crumble in my hands. The weight of it was heavier than paper. It was years of silence, years of sacrifice, years of a love I had mistaken for absence. "I don't deserve this," I whispered. His smile was faint, but it was enough. "You don't have to deserve love," he said. "You just have to carry it forward." The light overhead flickered once, then steadied, and for the first time I saw my father not as the man in the blue jacket, not as the tired figure slumped over a steering wheel, but as someone who had chosen deliberately, relentlessly, to build a bridge between his unfinished dream and my unspoken one. And in that moment, I realized he hadn't just been driving toward warehouses or deadlines. He had been driving toward me. It didn't happen overnight. Dreams never do. They grow in fits and starts, like saplings bending under the weight of storms, before they learn to straighten again. I spent weeks in that garage, hunched over the supplies he had gathered, afraid at first to even touch them. The blank pages stared back at me, crisp and unyielding, as if daring me to prove myself worthy of what he had sacrificed. But his voice lingered. "You don't have to deserve love, just carry it forward." So I began. One sketch, then another. Rough lines at first, hesitant and clumsy, but each page came easier than the last. My world shrank to charcoal dust and paint-stained fingers. And slowly, impossibly, I began to believe that maybe this wasn't just his dream I was borrowing. Maybe it had always been mine. Months later, when the school announced its annual spring exhibition, Mr. Levin encouraged me again. "This time you'll put your name on it," he said. Not a shrug, not a lie, not an excuse. My name. I almost said no. Old habits die hard. But when I glanced at my father, still moving slow from his hospital stay, but stronger now, sitting in that same folding chair in the garage with his eyes fixed on my work, I found myself nodding. The night of the exhibition, the gym buzzed just like before, but this time I wasn't hiding by the punch table. My drawings hung in a neat row, carefully mounted, light catching the subtle depth in each line. And in the back, on a folding chair near the exit, was my father, jacket zipped, hands folded, eyes shining beneath the tired weight they always carried. He looked smaller than the other parents, less polished, less proud in the conventional way. But when our eyes met, I saw something that eclipsed every doubt I'd ever carried. Pride, quiet, unshakable. The kind of pride that doesn't need to be announced because it has already been paid for mile by mile, night after night in silence. When people stopped to look at my work, I didn't shrink this time. I stood beside it, heart racing, breath uneven but steady. And when someone asked about the man in the drawings, the tired figure, the truck cab, the weary eyes, I didn't lie. "That's my dad," I said. And for the first time in my life, the words didn't burn with shame. They burned with love. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him lean back slightly, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He didn't clap. He didn't wave. He didn't need to. His silence had always been the loudest language he knew. And that night, in a gymnasium filled with noise and strangers, I finally learned how to hear it. It has been years since that night in the gym. My drawings have traveled farther than I ever thought possible. Some hang in quiet corners of coffee shops. Others found their way into galleries I once believed were reserved for people who spoke a language I could never learn. Each one carries a piece of him, the long highways, the sleepless nights, the steady hands on a steering wheel that never stopped turning toward me. My father doesn't drive as much anymore. His body won't allow it, but he still sits in the garage sometimes, surrounded by the smell of old cardboard and motor oil, flipping through my sketchbooks with a smile that says he never needed recognition for himself, only the assurance that the dream had survived. And when people ask me now why I draw the way I do, why my subjects are always so ordinary, a chair, a hand, a tired face at a kitchen table, I tell them it's because ordinary things are what love is made of. Small sacrifices, quiet miles, the things no one claps for but that hold up our entire lives. I used to resent the man in the blue jacket. Now he is the heartbeat of every line I put on paper. If there is one thing I've learned, it is this: love doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it shows up in a dented truck, with sore knees and calloused hands, driving mile after mile in the dark. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice so ordinary, you mistake it for shame. But it isn't shame, it's devotion. And it can change everything. Love letter, thank you for listening to this story. May it remind you to look closer at the quiet sacrifices around you and to see the love that hides in the ordinary. I wish you health, peace, and happiness with your family. Until next time, take care of yourselves and of one another.